Do I make myself clear, Jerome?
Ho, yes.
Oh, what?
Ho, nothing.
You having trouble understanding me, Jerome?
Ho, no. I mean, no ho, Sergeant. It's just plain ho.
A group of Army recruits endure a brutal drill sergeant as they go through basic training during the final days of World War II. This week, we chat about good times at the craft services table, how teen boys learned about sex in the years before Playboy, and the dangers of writers writing about writing. Then we find out if 1988's Biloxi Blues stands the test of time.
Test of time, James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today? James says gladiator with a glut, and Alan says as a father blah blah. It's the test of time, James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today? Test of time, James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Test of Time podcast. My name is Alan Noah, and joining me, as always, is the lovely, super cool in a nerdy way, James Brief. How you doing, James?
I'm feeling a little insulted, but I don't know. Maybe I'm not insulted because it's not the 80s anymore, and being called anything nerdy is not necessarily a bad thing anymore. So I'm doing well, Al. How are you?
I am doing just fine. I shaved my head. I think I kind of surprised you when you logged on. I got a new buzz cut going.
It looks good. Is this a permanent thing?
I don't know if it'll be permanent. It's just I was lazy and I don't know. It's just easier, you know? Like I've had Courtney been giving me haircuts for the past 9 months, 10 months, something like that. And she hates doing it and it always grows back so fast. I'm like, I'm just going to buzz it. I was talking with my brother-in-law. He shaved his head a while ago and he's like, it's kind of just easier. So think of all the money I'll save on shampoo.
Think of all the money you'll save by not having to tip your wife for her haircuts.
That is a very, very good point because I always tip her 25%. I mean, I don't pay her anything, so that's still zero.
You know what you and Neil Simon have in common, Al?
We're both Jews. We're both writers. I don't know what. We're both from New York?
Well, he had 3 plays, which are kind of known as the Eugene trilogy, sort of his semi-autobiographical plays about this Jewish New Yorker named Eugene. And he's had several films. And much like you recast your barber from Courtney to yourself, Eugene was actually recast in the different films. Like today, we're going through the movie adaptation of his play Biloxi Blues. It's sort of the sequel to another play and another film called Brighton Beach Memoirs.
Right. I saw that when I was doing my research today. And in the Brighton Beach Memoirs movie, the character of Eugene was played by Jonathan Silverman. And Jonathan Silverman went on to play the role of Eugene in Broadway Bound, which is the 3rd play in the trilogy, but he only played that character on stage. It was made into a TV movie, and it was a different guy in the TV movie. So it was 3 different actors in the 3 different movies, Jonathan Silverman, Matthew Broderick, and this guy, Corey Parker. And in some movies, they can do a recasting, and it works fine. Sometimes it's just a little bit weird. I feel like it happens a lot these days.
Yeah, I mean, there have been some recasts in history that have been really smooth, I'd say. They kind of look alike and, good actors. And some that have been quite jarring.
Right. I mean, it was a quote-unquote big deal at the time when Bill Murray was Bosley in the Charlie's Angels movie in, I think it was 2000. And then in the next movie, the character was played by Bernie Mac because Bill Murray didn't get along with Lucy Liu, apparently. But I don't know if that officially counts as a recasting because Bernie Mac was playing his brother. So it was a guy named Bosley, but it wasn't supposed to be the same Bosley.
I thought it would have been funnier if they kept it the same exact character and, didn't make any mention. But, there's kind of different categories of recasting. There's recasting because the actor just didn't want to do it again for whatever reason, like Bill Murray. There's reasons like the movie didn't really want to go with them again. That's happened before, like the role of Rachel Dawes from Batman Begins when it was Katie Holmes to The Dark Knight when it was Maggie Gyllenhaal.
That was because of the whole Tom Cruise, Katie Holmes thing, right? At least that was a rumor.
I don't think that one has ever come out as definitive, but certainly one where the studio said no and the actor had different ideas was Terrence Howard famously played Rhodey in Iron Man and actually was paid more than Robert Downey Jr., and he did not come back for the Iron Man 2 and the rest of the MCU. I believe it was because of a salary dispute. And finally, the third reason why there's recasting is, well, in the case of death, the case of Dumbledore, that was famously recast. It's not really movies, but in the TV show Doctor Who, which has been around for decades, they've kind of worked it into the story where there's a reason why there's a different actor, as opposed to, say, James Bond, who's always the same character, and they totally ignore why there's a different looking guy in there. It's just interesting the different reasons they do these things.
Yeah, I mean, I think with James Bond, usually when they start a new James Bond, they replace a lot of the other actors around Bond. Like it's a different M and a different Q and a different Moneypenny, or maybe there is no Moneypenny. Although they had Judi Dench, who was in the Pierce Brosnan, and then they kept her in the first few Daniel Craig Bond movies. And then that was a little bit weird. When they did it in, Rhodey, like you're saying, then it does kind of stand out. Or even, in the MCU, Edward Norton plays Bruce Banner and Hulk in the 2008 movie, and then he was recast as Mark Ruffalo in all the subsequent movies. And it's a little bit weird because it's supposed to be the same guy, and, we as the audience can figure it out, but it can be a little jarring.
Yeah, and I think my favorite type of recasting like this, when the audience is kind of like, that's weird, probably is when Don Cheadle first comes on the scene in Iron Man 2. And while the character of Rhodey is talking to Tony Stark, it's obvious he's talking to the audience because Don Cheadle as Rhodey comes on the scene and he goes, "Hey, it's me, let's just move on, and come on, it's me." And it makes sense in the context of why Rhodey's saying it to Stark, but it's obviously to the audience as, shut up and just watch the film.
Right. I mean, I think also like when you're dealing with these big, huge blockbusters and there's so much money at stake and everything has to be just right. If there's an actor who is fighting with another actor or there's a big salary dispute or something, one actor can't hold up the entire production. And they're gonna recast it. I mean, even look at Johnny Depp in Fantastic Beasts. It was a little controversial when they initially signed him for the first Fantastic Beasts movie, or I think he was in the second Fantastic Beasts movie. But regardless, his personal drama was becoming a distraction, and they recast him. And you could even say, well, hey, that's not the biggest franchise in the world. The Fantastic Beasts movies didn't make a ton of money. They kind of underperformed. But they're not just going to let Johnny Depp's personal problems take that franchise down even more. It's just safer to just recast.
Yeah, I mean, I think audiences, for the most part, certainly in the cases of death, there's certainly understanding. And, I think it really becomes movie to movie. Like, is the movie good with the new actor? I think Terrence Howard did a great job in the first Iron Man. And I think Don Cheadle did a great job in the rest of the MCU. And you replace one talented actor with another talented actor. I think that's the most important thing. Jonathan Silverman, he's a perfectly capable actor. And Matthew Broderick works just as well here. Though, to be fair, I have not seen Brighton Beach Memoirs, the movie, so I can't comment on that particular acting, but we got Matthew Broderick here.
We do. And let's talk about Biloxi Blues. As you said, it's the movie adaptation of Neil Simon's semi-autobiographical play of the same name. And it centers around a young man, Eugene Morris Jerome, played by Matthew Broderick, who's going through basic training in Biloxi, Mississippi in 1945. While he's at boot camp, Eugene and his fellow recruits are antagonized by their maniac drill instructor, Sergeant Toomey, who's played by Christopher Walken, and they all learn lessons about love, death, fear, and friendship. So I don't recall when this movie came out in 1988, so I'll just ask you what I always ask you. How did it do at the box office?
It did pretty well. This was a $20 million film, and it opened on March 25th, 1988, and it opened at number one with $7 million, on its way to $43 million domestically and $51 million worldwide.
Yeah, I mean, it's a war movie, quote unquote, and you can imagine that a war movie could be really expensive with battles and explosions and things like that. But this war movie is all at basic training. So there's no big action set pieces. There's no helicopters being shot out of the sky or anything like that. So the $20 million budget seems a little high in the late 80s for a movie that's just a lot of people in rooms talking to each other.
Right, and Matthew Broderick is he's fresh off of Ferris Bueller here, but I have to imagine that he was cast and this film was created and the pre-production was done before Matthew Broderick became such a big star. So I'm really wondering where the $20 million was in this film. There's no special effects, and it's interesting. $20 million today would be nothing, but right. I feel like Aliens was $20 million or something. There's a lot of people in the film, I guess. There's extras, but there's not really a lot of speaking roles. So I'm not sure where the $20 million went, but it made its money back, so good investment.
Catering. It all went to catering.
Craft services.
They had so many muffins on set. This is not true, by the way. I'm just imagining like Matthew Broderick and Christopher Walken hanging out at the craft services table, bonding over muffins. But yeah, the movie starts with voiceover, grumble, grumble. A bunch of these recruits are on their way to basic training. The voiceover is Eugene Jerome, a guy with two first names. So, obviously I love that. And he's talking about his experience. He's talking about some of the other guys he's on the train with. There's Wachowski, who's this sort of like meathead, knucklehead. There's Epstein, another Jew like Jerome from New York. I did catch David Schwimmer in a tiny role. I think he has one line on the train. And at first I was like, was that David Schwimmer? And I did see on the IMDb trivia that it was David Schwimmer in an uncredited role.
You've got another meathead, this guy Selridge. You've got kind of your nice guy, these two guys, one Carney and Hennessy. And with Jerome, you kind of got these six guys that are really quite different, even though they might have some similarities. You got the two Jewish guys from New York, but they're very different. You got the two meatheads, they're different, and the two nice guys, and they're different in their own ways, as we'll find out in the film.
Right. But for Eugene, he's nervous about going to basic training, and he gets there and all he can talk about is how hot it is because he's from New York and now he's in Mississippi and it's really hot. I didn't know it was going to be so hot. I don't know if I can handle this if it's going to be this hot this whole time.
Basic training, from what I understand, a lot of this stuff is really accurate. And my father, as I've mentioned before, he was a combat surgeon in the Vietnam War, and he went through basic training. And he wrote a book, I'll plug it here, it's called Hooch 8. And in this part about basic training, he goes, "Without question, the most terrifying part of our entire training was the crawl under live machine gun fire. Imagine a 100-yard flat stretch of dirt with wood partitions 6 feet apart, a little like a swim meet, but with a barbed wire ceiling 2 feet off the ground. We were required to low crawl as fast as we could while cradling our M1 rifles and our bent elbows. Behind us was the rat-tat-tat-tat of machine gun fire. This was no mere simulation. Several machine guns located behind the starting line were firing live rounds just above our heads. If you panicked and stood up, you would be hit by live rounds. If you lagged behind, a megaphone-wielding gunny would scream, 'Move! Move! Move! Get your fucking ass going!'"
I mean, whenever I watch a movie about the army or basic training or anything like that, I always think to myself, my God, I wouldn't last 2 minutes there. I think some people are built for it, and I think some people are good in that environment. Obviously, there are many people who love that stuff, or, they hate it at the time, but then they look back on it fondly. I just know I would suck at it. I would be like Eugene. I would be like Epstein. I would not know what to do. I would be completely out of my element. And, a guy like Toomey, played by Christopher Walken, he is horrifically intimidating. And the things that he does to them are done for the purpose of toughening them up and teaching them how to fall in line and to follow orders and all these things that could save their lives someday. But it's also just miserable. It's like a form of almost psychological torture, the way that Epstein and Eugene talk back to Toomey. So then he makes the other people in the platoon do push-ups. So he's making other people hate them for the things they've done. I mean, the only somewhat kind of a little bit analogous thing I can relate to from my own life is pledging the fraternity, and you and I pledged together, and we never went through anything anywhere near as bad as what these guys go through in this movie or what real Army recruits go through in real actual life.
Yeah, however, the analogy is that when we would get punished, instead of saying, Al, you clean this up, they would say, Al, you fucked up. Everyone except for Al has to clean up double. And, that kind of punishment in some ways works even better. They have a reasoning to this madness, because we can't conflate the Army of Vietnam War and before to the men and women that serve today, because the men and women that serve today, in large part, they're all volunteers. Some of them maybe more for the college money, but they're still going on their own volition. And in 1940s and even in the 60s and the Vietnam War in the early 70s, these were regular people. So you have Eugene and you have these regular guys along with your Wachowskis and the meatheads, and they got to teach these guys how to use M16s. My dad and his co-doctors, you're training them for, look, this is what you're going to do, and this is why you're doing it. There's not going to be any negotiation. When your lieutenant says march, you're just going to follow orders. They have to kind of beat out that independent civilian kind of mentality. And no, you're in the Army. You listen to what people say, or as Sergeant Toomey probably correctly says, we have discipline or people will die. There is a method to his madness.
Right. I mean, it is literal life and death, which is why I feel guilty about even kind of comparing it to pledging, which is just, an excuse for college juniors and seniors to yell at college freshmen and sophomores and feel better about themselves because of whatever sad things are happening in their lives. Yeah, I said it. Our old brothers who are listening, they know who they are. But getting back to the movie, another thing that I think I would hate about being in basic training is the food, which from what I've heard and from what I've seen in movies like this, it is inedible. And all of the guys hate it and they don't want to eat it, except for Wachowski, who Eugene says is like a goat. He'll just eat anything that you put in front of him. But they try to get out of eating the food. Eugene says that he can't eat it because of a religious reason. And Toomey says, now, I know that Rosh Hashanah is in September and it is March, I think, something like that. I just love the way that Christopher Walken says Rosh Hashanah. He's like, you can't pull one over on me. And Epstein has a letter from his internist saying that he can't eat certain foods. And then, of course, Toomey just rips it up and tells him he has to eat all the food and the ripped up letter.
Oh, Epstein's whining is even better. It's like, my internist at Mount Sinai on Fifth Avenue says that I have a nervous stomach. And as if Sergeant Toomey is going to read this and go, oh, I'm so sorry. Please sit down in the officers' mess hall and you eat the special food, because I really, I feel so bad if your nervous stomach were to get upset in any way. So it's just great. But the movie takes place in 1945, and as we know, spoiler alert, the Allies win World War II, and VE Day and VJ Day for Victory in Europe and Japan Day, the war is over by the end of the summer. And so in the old days, when you used to watch a movie, before any movie, there was news because there weren't really televisions in every home. So you'd see regular news around the world, and there's the great propaganda stuff of Allies are kicking Nazi butt, and everyone's cheering, yay! Because of course everyone wants to see that, and that's a great thing. But then there's a really sobering scene, and this is the first part of the film that we're reminded this is a deadly war, because everything has been kind of happy-go-lucky and, funny little jokes and stuff, because we suddenly see, after the news of Allies are kicking the Nazis back, we see hundreds of coffins of fallen soldiers, and, you see crosses, you see Stars of David, and they're all 18-year-old boys, and they're really looking at like, wow, like, we're going to be dead soon. And there was an invasion of Japan that was going to be carried out in 1945. I'm not sure if you know this, but there were so many Purple Heart medals that were manufactured in anticipation of this invasion that was anticipated to have like over 50% casualties. I think Epstein quotes it was going to be like 66% casualty rate. But the Purple Hearts is an award given when you're wounded or killed in action. And there were so many made in anticipation of this invasion that never happened, that the Purple Hearts that are given out today in the Afghanistan war today are still from that 1945 batch. We still have not gotten through what the U.S. Army anticipated giving out to families in 1945. That's how many people were supposed to die there.
Wow. That is really sobering and harrowing and awful and horrible that our government thought that was maybe just a price we were going to have to pay. But so speaking of, these guys thinking about their deaths, there's a scene where they decide to play a game about what would they do if they knew that they were going to die in a week, that they were going to be killed in action. At first, Eugene just says, what would you do? And then they decide to all throw in $5 and they make it a game. Who has the best fantasy? And some of the fantasies are interesting. Carney says he just wants to sing at Radio City Music Hall, which is sweet. But then they all make fun of him for that because that's a weird fantasy. And then Selridge says that he wants to have sex with 7 women who each give him $1 million because he's so good in bed, which is a very bizarre fantasy, but okay, sure, why not? Hennessy is very honest. He says he just wants to spend the time with his family. Wachowski says he wants to have sex with the Queen of England, which everyone is grossed out at, but, he kind of just owns that, hey, that's my fantasy and that's what I want to do, and, all right. Epstein is really hesitant to admit his fantasy, but he says that he wants to make Toomey do 200 push-ups in front of the platoon. He makes them do push-ups all the time, and he would love to see him do 200 push-ups in front of all of them, which is a really good fantasy. Even Wachowski, who doesn't like Epstein, is like, I got to admit, that's a pretty good one. And Eugene's fantasy is 3 things. He wants to lose his virginity, win the Pulitzer, because don't forget he's a writer, and he wants to fall in love. And it struck me a little bit that he wouldn't want to lose his virginity with the girl he falls in love with, that he considers those 2 separate things with 2 separate girls, which is what eventually happens to him in the movie. I don't know. I think that's just sort of maybe that 1940s mentality, like the way that people then looked at sex. Like there were women you had sex with and there were women that you fell in love with. I guess from a test of time perspective, that kind of leapt out at me.
It's interesting. Yeah, he says, I want to lose my virginity and I want to fall in love. It's not like I want to meet the most beautiful, wonderful person ever and we'll make love. It is an interesting thing. And there's Epstein and there's Jerome's character. And until now, they're both New York Jews and they kind of look alike. And you kind of think that they might be a little similar. And you also think that Epstein is the real kind of wussy one. But Epstein actually, he's not as wussy as I thought he was, because Wachowski starts making a bunch of Jew comments, and Epstein's not going to take that shit. And he's pushing back against Wachowski, the biggest guy in the platoon. And, you push a guy like like Wachowski, you're going to get your ass kicked. And Epstein still, he doesn't care about that. He pushes Wachowski and he's like, I'm not going to take the Jew bashing crap from you. And Jerome does not back him up there.
Right. And I haven't complained about the voiceover in this movie because it's like from a play and he's telling you his thoughts when you can't really know his thoughts in the beginning of the movie when they're on the train. But here he says, I was mad at myself because I didn't step in and defend Epstein because he's a fellow Jew. The voiceover really does spell it out for you here.
But it also works because Eugene is writing in a journal. So the voiceover, it's not a voiceover necessarily to the audience. I mean, it is, but really it's a voiceover of what he's writing in his journal. I mean, I don't have a problem with voiceovers, but I would imagine that that's an allowed voiceover because a typical trope in movies and television is that when a character is reading a letter, usually you'll have them either read it out loud or you'll hear the voiceover as they move their eyes across the letter. So I think it's fair because this is something you definitely want to get what Eugene's thoughts are.
Right. And then we do get a little bit more of a sense of Epstein's character when Wachowski is accusing someone of stealing $62 from his footlocker, and Wachowski blames Epstein because Epstein is a Jew, and Wachowski believes that all Jews are money hungry. And Toomey comes in and he says, I heard that someone stole Wachowski's money, because that's a thing that Toomey is saying and seems to be fairly accurate, that he hears everything that is whispered, and there's no way Toomey could have heard it. Toomey hears it. But so he's like going to teach the guys a lesson unless someone comes forward and admits to stealing the $62, and they're going to lose their weekend privileges, their time off the base, which they're all looking forward to. And so Epstein just takes $62 out of his pocket and puts it down. He doesn't admit that he stole it, but he just pays the money back so that everyone can get on with their lives. And then Toomey is furious because he took the money. He was doing it to teach the guys a lesson. And by Epstein just giving the money back, he totally undercut him. And from Epstein's point of view, he's like, well, I don't care about the money. I just want everyone to have this nice weekend. And Toomey's like, well, why would you admit to something you didn't do? And Eugene asks him that also. And he's like, no matter what I do, I'm going to get latrine duty. In other words, cleaning the bathroom. So he just figures, might as well. It doesn't matter.
He does say that, but there's another line that he says. He goes, you have your logic, I have mine. Epstein, he's a smart guy. I think Epstein did this on purpose. I think Epstein wanted to get thrown out of the army. I think he would rather do a couple years in Leavenworth prison and he'd be alive, because a guy like Epstein is not going to survive an invasion of Japan. And he knows this. And I think he'd rather be a convicted felon with both of his legs and a beating heart than be shipped off to the front line in the Pacific.
That's very interesting. I didn't interpret it that way, but now that you're saying that, that makes perfect logical sense. I want to move on to the next scene where Eugene does fulfill one of the things on his fantasy list, which is to lose his virginity. And I don't remember if I said this or not last week when we were doing our next week on the show, we'll do Biloxi Blues. I think I might have said that I hadn't seen this movie. I do remember this scene where they all go and visit this prostitute. She's played by Park Overall, who I knew from the sitcom Empty Nest. She was also the voice of Alice on The Critic, and I never miss an opportunity to mention The Critic whenever I can.
It stinks. No, it's actually awesome, but that was Jay Sherman's catchphrase on that show.
Right. And I didn't remember the rest of the movie, but when I got to the scene, I was like, oh yeah, I have seen this movie. And Eugene is nervous and he doesn't want to have sex with the prostitute because it's a little weird, and his friends just went in and had sex with her first, and then he's going to go, and he's not going to do it. He chickens out, but then he goes back in to get his hat, and she's there, and she invites him into the room, and yeah, he does it. And I think it's supposed to be sweet and endearing in a way. I couldn't help but think that even in 1945, still nobody was using a condom. There's no mention of that. I don't know about the history of condoms, but like, it just seems like a really bad idea to not use protection.
I mean, I was sort of thinking that, but then again, when I think of movies like Austin Powers, when someone was talking to him about, it's the 90s now, Austin, you have to use condoms. And he goes, condoms are for sailors, meaning like only like soldiers are supposed to use that when they go to prostitutes. So maybe they used one, but it's definitely a post-HIV mentality, post-80s mentality to think that, because several guys, when they walk up to the prostitute's house, two Navy guys are walking out of her apartment, and she also mentions after the four of them go, yeah, you gotta hurry up because I got a bunch of Navy guys coming here at 2. So I'm like, oh my God, this woman, like, what did she use for like birth control or anything like that? It's just wild. Like, you can't not think of these things the way we would think of it in a post-HIV world.
By bringing up birth control, yeah, I was thinking, even forgetting about STDs, which definitely did exist in the 40s, yeah, I mean, this woman could get pregnant. This is before the pill was invented. So I couldn't help but think about that. I did like, before they go in and they're talking about how many positions there are, and Wachowski says there are 17 acceptable positions. I mean, I don't know about you, but I was trying to like run through in my mind, like, what does he consider the 17 acceptable positions?
And Eugene says, actually, there's 52 positions. And I was thinking he was going to say, I looked at a Kama Sutra in the New York Public Library or something. But his answer actually makes a lot of sense. And he goes, I have a dirty deck of cards. You know, a kid in the 40s, that makes so much sense. Playboy wasn't around in the 40s.
Nope.
This was it. Like, his entire sexual knowledge was from this deck of cards. So it's kind of a throwaway line, but I think that was probably exactly what some 17-year-old virgin, 18-year-old virgin was thinking in 1945.
Probably. I don't think I can even come up with 17 positions. I mean, I think I only really know the one.
There's on top and bottom, Al.
Mind blown. Thank you for the tip. I appreciate that, James.
All right. Well, you're welcome. And shortly after Eugene fulfills his first fantasy of losing his virginity, he seems to be on his way to one of his other fantasies from the If You Only Had a Week to Live game. And he goes to the USO dance. It's a dance run by the convent. So the nuns are staring at the girls, and there's all these rules. They have to be arm length apart, and they're not allowed to dance with any one boy for more than one song. And I just love these little details. I have no idea if this is true, but it just screamed of authenticity.
It definitely seemed like the kind of thing that could happen. And a bunch of the other guys are like, yeah, we're out of here. This is lame. Eugene wants to stay, and he starts dancing with this woman named Daisy, who's played by Penelope Ann Miller, who's been in a bunch of things. I see her and just automatically think of Kindergarten Cop. That's just where my mind goes. But they have like this sweet conversation, and it's going pretty well, but they can only dance for one song as per the rules, like you're saying. And Eugene tries to like make a date, but they're not allowed to make dates. But then Daisy says, well, you know, I go to this church every Sunday, so maybe you could bump into me there. And then they go on these dates. He goes and sees her every weekend, which I was a little unclear about, that every weekend is an off weekend. Are they always allowed to leave the base? They didn't really explain that, but whatever. That's an insignificant detail. And you see that they fall in love, and it's sweet. So two of the things from Eugene's fantasy are actually coming true. He loses his virginity and he's falling in love, but when he gets back to the barracks that night, his footlocker is unlocked, and the other guys start reading through his journal.
Right, and it's a dangerous thing when people are going to read your inner thoughts. And it's not like it's a password-protected, online journal for yourself. This thing is right in the open. This was not a mistake. Eugene lost his locker key, so he purposely left his locker open with his notebook in there, so the guys get a hold of his journal. At first, there's a couple guys, like the good guy, Carney, like he's like, guys, don't read that. That's really wrong. But then Wachowski Wachowski, he reads, yeah, you want to know what he said about you, Carney? Turns out Eugene writes that Carney, he's a really, really nice guy, and I like him a lot. But, he's not the brightest bulb, and if I was in a foxhole, he's the last person I'd want to be with. Ouch, that's really hard to hear. And then Wachowski, he's like, oh, I'm going to read what's said about me. And Eugene walks in and he's seeing this. And it's just awful watching Eugene have to hear it because there's nothing you could do. Wachowski is the biggest guy in the bunk. And if he's going to read it, he's going to read it. And, Wachowski, it goes the other way. You think he's going to be like, oh, that stupid piece of shit meathead. And he kind of says he's loud, rambunctious, he's kind of an idiot. However, he's without a doubt the best soldier in the group. And it would not surprise me if he's awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor at the end of this. So Wachowski's like, all right, yeah, not bad. At that point, Wachowski, because he's been treated well, he's like, here you go, you can have it back. Except Epstein, who, you thought was, again, this meek little guy, he takes the notebook and he's like, if you don't lock it up, this is public. So Epstein decides to read it. He's reading the typical kind of things of like, he's kind of whiny. And then he says something that is really, really bad for Epstein to hear, especially in 1945. He says, I think that Arnold Epstein might be a homosexual.
Right. And he doesn't say it at this point, but he says it later in the movie that he thought that because Epstein never talks about girls. And Epstein says, well, I never talked about dogs. Do you think that makes me a Cocker Spaniel? Which I kind of thought was a funny line. And to be fair, Eugene isn't saying it in a negative way. He's just saying, I think he might be gay.
And he even says, I hate that bothers me. Like, he feels bad that it's even like a thought in his head. It's not that it makes him uncomfortable around him, but it's just the fact that he even notes it. Eugene is like, look, why am I upset about this? But it does for some strange reason bother me, and I hate that it bothers me. But at least he's honest with himself that this is not a right thing to think, but he still thinks it.
I believe it's Selridge, if I'm not mistaken, who says, I say people should be allowed to do whatever they want. And, that's kind of a quote unquote modern progressive thought in 1945, at least in my 2021 outlook. Maybe it's not. Maybe there are tons of people in 1945 who thought that. But it comes into play again because one of the commanding officers is like going into the bathroom one night and he walks in on two guys who are having sex together. And one who is closer to the window is able to escape and no one sees who it is. But the other one is caught and they're basically saying, we found one guy, we're going to interrogate him. He's going to have to name his partner.
Right. And, in the 1990s, President Bill Clinton made a famous change to the Army for the first time ever. And he made this policy. Do you remember what it was called? The 4-word policy?
Sure, of course. Don't ask, don't tell.
Right. And it's very important because don't ask means don't ask about people's sexual orientation. It's unimportant.
But it was a question that was asked when you signed up for the Army. Are you a homosexual? And if you said yes, they wouldn't let you in.
Yeah, and the second part, even in Bill Clinton's time in the 1990s, the second part of that was don't tell, because it's still illegal to be a homosexual in the military. So I don't know if it was President Bush or President Obama that officially changed that policy, but you would be locked up in Leavenworth prison for 5 to 10 years for the crime of being a homosexual.
Right. And because they read the journal in front of everyone, and because everyone heard that Eugene thought that Epstein is gay, now all eyes are on Epstein. And they're all like, yeah, it must be Epstein. And in voiceover, Eugene has a line where he says, I realize the power of the written word. When something is written down, people just assume that it's true. And everyone's waiting for the moment where Epstein is outed as the other gay man that was having sex in the latrine, but it wasn't Epstein, it was Hennessy. And Hennessy is a character we haven't really talked about, but he's one of the other guys in their platoon. He says that he's half Irish and his mother was colored. Just from the complexion of the actor, I found that a little hard to believe because he was very, very just pale white. But he also is the one character who defended Epstein and defended Eugene and like always comes and like helps out when Wachowski's being too much of a dick. Hennessy's the guy who stands up for them. And it turns out that Hennessy is the guy who's dragged off to Leavenworth and no one stands up to defend him.
Right. And, I remembered that Hennessy was gay. There's a couple earlier scenes whenever they say, like, what are you, a homo? And Hennessy turns his head. And I thought that was interesting, because I knew early on. But when Hennessy says that his mother was black, he says his mother was black Irish. Now, I think it's kind of a joke a little bit because black Irish, it's a type of Irish person, with dark hair and dark eyes. They may or may not have been a descendant of the Spanish Armada and some mixing with people from Spain, but I think it's a little bit of a joke. Not a joke, but almost like Hennessy's going to be like, yeah, well, I'm black, because Wachowski says at one point, they're like, they wouldn't have let any gay people in this army, just like they wouldn't let any black people in our platoon. They would have been segregated, because, of course, black people were in their own platoons in World War II. And I think he was just trying to get a little rise out of him, like, yeah, well, what if I said I was black and I just didn't tell the army because I look white? But I don't think he actually means that his mother is of African-American descent. So I think he just meant it more of he's black Irish.
Oh, okay. Fair enough. But after Hennessy is sent off to Leavenworth, Toomey comes into the barracks one night and he is super drunk. He's holding a gun and he tells Epstein to like come into his private quarters, and Epstein is terrified. And now Eugene does stand up for Epstein where he didn't before. And he says, no, he can't do anything if I'm around, if I'm the witness. But then Toomey just says, all right, Eugene, you come into my quarters instead. And he's saying that he's going to be discharged and sent to a veterans hospital. He mentioned earlier in the movie that he has a metal plate in his head, and once he gets sent to this hospital, they're going to replace the plate in his head, and then that's it. His military career is done. So he doesn't want to go out like that. And maybe instead of going out like that, he'll just kill one of his men, and then he'll go to prison instead, which is very, very weird that seems like a better alternative. But Toomey's a little crazy, so I guess that makes sense in his own twisted logic.
Oh, yeah, and Toomey is, he's played by Christopher Walken, so he is in full psycho Christopher Walken mode here. I think he's absolutely terrifying in this scene, and you have absolutely no idea what's going to happen here. I was even thinking when Eugene is like, oh, nothing will happen if I'm here, I'm like, dude, he'll just kill both of you. Like, what's going to stop him from murdering two New York Jewish guys and then putting a bullet in his own brain? Like, I don't think that's a really logical idea, but I do like when he stands in front of him, Toomey's like, all right, I'll just take you, Eugene. And he goes, Epstein, get out of here. And Epstein, who doesn't do what Eugene does, he's like, okay, I'll get out of here. And at first you think, oh, Epstein, you little weasel, like, you got to stand up for him. But no, Epstein immediately, he walks out casually, like, see you later, Toomey. But the second he walks out, he sprints to the mess hall or the rec hall, wherever it is, and he gets all the guys. And he's like, guys, you need to come back to the barracks. Toomey's going to kill Eugene, I'm telling you.
Right. Which does seem weird. Shouldn't he have gone to like a commanding officer and said something instead of just the other recruits? Also, the other recruits all go with him, but they're just like standing outside of the room, like eavesdropping, like they're listening to some salacious gossip when it really does seem like Toomey is going to kill Eugene. The other guys don't help. Eugene sort of wins him over because Toomey says, oh, I heard about your fantasy game. I want to play. I want to tell you my fantasy. My fantasy is to take some no good recruit and turn him into a good soldier. And I've threatened you. I'm going to kill you. You better arrest me. And Eugene is petrified, and he's a lot smaller just physically than Toomey, but he does take the gun away from Toomey only when Toomey like tells him to and basically lets go of the gun. But still, Toomey's impressed by what Eugene does. He opens the door and sees everyone there. And then Toomey is very matter-of-factly like, okay, I did all of these things. You need to arrest me. You need to take me into custody now. And Eugene says, no, I think we should ask the other recruits what we should do with you. And Epstein says, no, we don't need to arrest you. We just need to make you do 200 push-ups, which is a callback to his fantasy. That was what he wanted earlier. And Toomey has that crazy Christopher Walken smile, and he says, okay, sure. And he's happy to do the 200 push-ups.
Oh, but he's even like, aren't you going to make me hit the deck? And then Epstein's like, yeah, hit the deck. And as he's down on the floor, Toomey's like, aren't you going to tell me to count off? And this is like a pouring monsoon Mississippi rain. Epstein's like, yeah, count off. And then Toomey starts doing his push-ups in the mud.
There was the thought that occurred to me of is he just going to do the push-ups and then get up and be like, actually, I still wanted to kill you. And then shoot one of the guys. And that's not what happened. The movie basically ends after that with voiceover saying that they finished up basic training with another drill sergeant, and they did kind of miss Toomey because the new guy was very boring, and they were going to go off to war, and Eugene said his goodbye to Daisy, but then on the way, America dropped the atomic bombs on Japan, the war ended, and they never saw action. They never went to the front lines. And then there's sort of the what happened to everyone epilogue. The one line that kind of made me laugh was that Wachowski becomes an overweight football coach, and now he's on a low-fat cottage cheese diet. That just sounds like a thing that people in the 80s would talk about. He needs to go on a low-fat cottage cheese diet.
Eugene had said it, and you mentioned it before, that when you write something down, it is the truth. And that still exists today. Look at what's going on in the world today. This so-called QAnon conspiracy theory. These people believe it. Why do they believe it? Because it's written down on the internet. When it's written down, people will believe something. And I love that Eugene learned a big lesson that when you write it, it's true. And the best part is that in the epilogue, you learn that Eugene was wrong about every single character that he wrote. And so just because he wrote down it was not true. Wachowski, he's not the greatest soldier ever. He becomes a 280-pound football coach who has an ulcer. And Selrich, he stays as a career guy in the Army, and he's a private after 18 years in the Army. Epstein's not this meek guy. He goes back to New York, he becomes a lawyer, and he takes down the mob. Do you remember what Epstein is known by from the mob?
Yeah, they call him the most feared man in New York City or something.
Yeah, I love it. And Jerome, he does become a writer, but he was also wrong about something else. He kept saying, it's such a shame that I couldn't be with Daisy because she was just so perfect. But, she's Catholic and I'm Jewish, and that's totally impossible for us to meet. Yeah, once again, he was wrong because he says, I met up with Daisy one time after the war, and she wound up becoming Daisy Horowitz, and she marries a Jewish doctor. And, he was wrong there too. He could have been with Daisy too. So I really like that, this 18-year-old kid was wrong about a lot of stuff, which is exactly what an 18-year-old is going to be.
I like that too. But I hate that he says, well, and me, I became a writer. I even wrote about my experiences in the Army. I wrote a play about it. I called it Biloxi Blues. And then I just roll my eyes and smack my forehead of oh, I get it. It's you and your story, and we just watch the... I hate that. I hate that. That's so just hokey and corny.
It's an unnecessary meta line.
Yes, that really kind of pissed me off as the movie ended.
There's really no reason for us to realize that this is actually a somewhat semi-autobiographical. It could just be fiction about a guy in the Army. My guess is it's a little more obvious that the guy who's writing the play is the guy who stars in the play. That's my guess. I don't know for sure. But it does seem a little bit out of place. And, there's a joke in it that in the movie, he tells everyone that the prostitute gave him a second round for free. And he says, I wrote wrote Biloxi Blues as a play, and if they ever make it into a movie, maybe I'll take out that lie that I said about how I got a freebie for a second round. So it's a cute joke, but it's unnecessary, I think.
I don't even think it's a cute joke.
But what I really like is I love the ending when he says the reason why he looks on this with nostalgia. He doesn't say, oh, I remember it fondly as the best time of my life because, you know what? These were the greatest guys I ever knew. And, you know, you always think of these army stories of, oh, those men, they were in the foxhole with me and they're the greatest bunch of guys ever. And my father, he just had a 40th anniversary reunion with the other surgeons in his platoon and he loves these guys. And, you know, you're bonded with them forever. But he says he didn't remember it fondly necessarily because of the guys. He says, I remember it as the best time of my life because of the most selfish reason of all. Because we were young. We were young, we were dumb, we had our whole lives ahead of us, and what a great time to be alive is when you're 18. And I do like that ending. It's a really nice lesson, and it's a good ending to Biloxi Blues.
I suppose.
Yeah, so, you know, with that ending, what do you think of 1998's Biloxi Blues? What about this film does not hold up today, Al?
Well, I did just kind of touch on that thing about the line at the end there about him being a writer and he wrote his own story. I really don't like it when writers write about writing. Like, that just feels pretentious to me. And I'm not saying, like, I hate seeing any writer character in any movie. Courtney and I just watched the Let Them All Talk movie with Meryl Streep that's on HBO Max, and Meryl Streep plays a writer who is pretentious, but it's like part of the joke, and it's why people don't like her is because she's a pretentious writer. So that works. But I felt like this was kind of earnest about like, and that's why I told my story. And as a writer, I believe that my words are important. And it's like, yeah. But if you're writing the movie, which Neil Simon did, don't tell me about why it's important to write. Just write a good movie. You know what I mean? And I say that as a writer, but that's a personal pet peeve of mine. Overall, though, I gotta say, I found this movie very meh. I was just not really that into it. I definitely want to watch Full Metal Jacket at some point on the podcast. I remember thinking that was a really deep, impactful movie about being in basic training. We are going to watch Stripes. I feel like we've name-checked that movie a dozen times. I was thinking, man, I wish I was watching Stripes right now because it would be this kind of thing, but it has Bill Murray and Harold Ramis in it. This movie I just felt was rote, and there were a lot of the stereotypical things. There's a crazy drill sergeant. There's guys who are horny and want to have sex. Basic training's hard. The food is terrible. You know, like, it's just a lot of things that I've seen in other movies. And this movie didn't really present it in a way that I thought was particularly interesting or captivating. Yes, I love Christopher Walken. He's great to watch. He chews the scenery constantly. Matthew Broderick is fine in this movie. He didn't really blow me away, to be honest. I was reading today that Roger Ebert called this movie shallow and predictable, and nothing seems fresh. And I really agree with that. I don't always agree with Roger Ebert, but I happen to on this case. And it didn't really move me all that much. I guess you could make the argument that because it's a period movie and because war is hell and basic training is hell, that it does work. But I was just very underwhelmed by this movie, and I'm going to say that it does not stand the test of time. What do you think, James?
You said, I hate when writers write about writing. If you call yourself a writer and you do not read Stephen King's book or listen to the book on tape that he reads himself, Stephen King's book called On Writing, you are not as good a writer as you could be. That is a master class in writing. I'm begging you, Al, to read that book or just get the audiobook of it. It's not a fictionalized book, though. It's about how to write better.
You don't need to beg me. I've read it. Okay,
so you agree that's a perfect book on writing.
That is required reading. Yes, I agree.
Okay. So that being said, I agree with you on a couple things. The film, it does fake you out. This is a war movie that in the end it kind of teases you, and it's totally not a war movie. And in a good way, all these guys, I guess, don't have to get killed in World War II because that World War II ended after only 6 years, I guess 4 for the United States. But I agree with you that Christopher Walken is amazing in this film, and he's perfect Christopher Walken in this. I mean, he is cast perfectly in this film. The drill sergeants in fiction are usually crazy guys, and Christopher Walken is a good one for that. I disagree with you on Matthew Broderick. I think he's very charming in this film. I think he's really well cast. I think he's a very good actor. And it might be a little bit Ferris Bueller in the Army. He's kind of the same character. And, I don't think there's too much difference there. All that being said, I like it a lot. I do. I saw that the Rotten Tomatoes, it is certified fresh, but it's like 71%. And, I think that's perfect. I think that this is not everyone's going to like this film. And I think that's perfectly fair that you don't like it. It connected with me. I'm surprised how, I guess you could call it progressive, some of the stuff in it was. And I thought it was funny enough for me. It's an hour and 45 minutes. It probably could have been a little quicker. I think they could have cut out maybe the entire opening scene on the train. There's a couple other things they probably could have cut. But overall, I think it's a tight film. And I will say that this film does stand the test of time.
To be clear, I don't think it's a terrible movie. I do think, though, there is a lot of stuff that could be cut. Like when they're talking about their fantasies, that's an important scene, and I get that. But there's so much of like, hey, it's lights out. Okay, but now we need to keep talking about the fantasies. Okay, we'll keep talking about the fantasies. Oh, but now it's lights out again. Like, just cut it down. Just get to it. Like they drag some of that stuff out a little too much.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very competently directed. We haven't mentioned, it's directed by Mike Nichols, and he is one of the best directors ever. He directed The Graduate. He directed an iconic 80s film called Working Girl, The Birdcage. He directed Angels in America. I don't know if you ever saw that miniseries on HBO.
I did.
Mm-hmm. I think the film is competently directed, but let's try one other shot at this. I'm going to give you another Matthew Broderick film, and I'm going to give you another war film, and let's see if maybe it works better next week. Do you know what film I'm talking about?
No, what movie is that?
It's Glory, the movie about the black troops in the United States Civil War that's led by a white man, played by Matthew Broderick. It's based on a true story, and it's a very famous battalion, so we're going to take a look at that next week.
I just pulled it up. It was released in 1989. So Matthew Broderick in 88 played an Army recruit in World War II. And then the following year, he was a guy who was actually in the Army, but in the Civil War. How about that? I'm looking forward to watching that and discussing that next week. As always, we want you to talk to us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We are at Test of Time Pod. Don't forget, we've got merch at TeePublic. Get yourself a Test of Time t-shirt, sweatshirt, hoodie, whatever. You will look sharp in your Test of Time merch. I guarantee that. Buy something, take a picture of it. We'd love to see that. And we'll see you next time, everybody.
Bye.